moving. So if I was going to declare to you, make a statement about something that I believe was one of the greatest inventions, possibly in the history of mankind. I didn't say in all of mankind. I'm just saying in the history of mankind. I think one of the greatest inventions to ever come around actually came around in the 80s. And some of you are going to laugh at that too, because it was the 80s and it was not known for some things. But I think there's one thing that came out of the 80s that really shaped mankind. And if you started to guess, you could guess things like this. If you were around in the 80s, you would guess things like the Nintendo Entertainment System, right? That was that was a big deal for us. Okay, if you ever played Atari, that was quite an advancement. Some of you have never played either of them. You got to catch up. But possibly one of the things on the list might be something like a disposable camera. They came around in the 80s, believe it or not, which then created a mess at wedding receptions. If you've ever had to see them on your table, and as the bride, you get the pictures back and people were goofing and not being serious with them. Things like the stealth plane came around in the 80s, or even the space shuttle, which was one of my favorites. But for me personally, if I was going to say to you, I think, and I don't know if you agree with this, I think one of the greatest things that ever came out was this little device. Look on the screen. This little guy right here. Yeah, the Sony Walkman, okay? So now, before you just start to laugh and maybe in your mind you're going to disagree with me, let me just offer something as evidence that it was great, and it's this next picture right here. Yeah, if you never lugged one of these around, then you don't know what a relief it was to finally get the Sony Walkman. Man, if you were a kid on the school bus, lugging them, and believe it, we did it, lugged them on the school bus to school every day. Some of these boom boxes weighed more than the kids carrying them. So it was a real disaster. But let me tell you why I think, for me personally, the Sony Walkman shaped the world in a unique way. Because in the history of the development of all things, things like music started to change. And with the Sony Walkman came this profound ability now to basically walk around every day, put your earphones on, and walk to your own soundtrack. Like you could walk to the music of your own life. And for some of us, that was a big deal, right? Because music is a big deal. I started discovering some quotes about music, and I was astounded by some of the people who've spoke to the idea of music. Look at this. Friedrich Nietzsche said, "Without music, life would be a mistake." If you know Friedrich Nietzsche, that's impressive because he was not a very upbeat guy. Plato said this: "Music gives a soul to the universe, wings to the mind, flight to the imagination, and life to everything." That's cool. I mean, that's a mouthful right there. Albert Einstein said, "If I were not a physicist, I would probably be a musician." Now, I would expect all the band members to say, if I was not a musician, I'd be a physicist, if that's true, but maybe not. He said, "I often think in music. I live my daydreams in music. I see my life in terms of music." That's cool. My wife thinks I do that because I tap all the time. I don't know why, but I'm always asking her, "Don't you hear the music?" And she's like, "No, I don't." So she may not agree with this quote. Keith Richards, now you're going to have to give me one on this one, but Keith Richards said this: "Music is a language that doesn't speak in particular words. It speaks in emotions. And if it's in the bones, it's in the bones." I thought the first part of that quote was really good. I thought the last part he might have fallen off a little bit there. Leo Tolstoy said this: "Music is the shorthand of emotion." Are you catching a theme here of how important it is, of how much it plays into our emotions? Confucius even made this statement: "Music produces a kind of pleasure which human nature cannot do without." Think about that. The Bible even speaks to music, right? King Saul would call in David before he became king when he was being tormented, and he would have David bring out his little harp. And I don't know why the harp, maybe they didn't have electric guitars back then, so I'm guessing that's why the harp had to suffice. But he would have David play the harp, and it said when David would play the harp, the terror would leave him, and he felt better. Music has amazing qualities. It can be very personal, right? Everybody's got their own style of music that they like. You might like country and western, somebody else like rock and roll, but it has a feel for being very personal, right? You can have your likes and your dislikes. Music evokes emotional responses. And music can also change your perspective. Sometimes the right song just has to come on the radio, and before you know it, you've had a really bad day, but Tom Petty's on, and what are you doing? You're free falling down the highway singing with them, right? Music can change your perspective, and I know it does. Listen, just walk with me for a second down memory lane. Did you ever go to a junior high dance? Did you ever remember, or do you remember a junior high dance, maybe a high school dance, that in your mind is just kind of epic, like you remember that night? Maybe it was in the gymnasium. Maybe it was at a hall somewhere. Maybe it was at a local hotel ballroom or something. But you went to this dance, and in your mind, it was just everything. Like most of your teenage years can be summarized by this junior high dance. Now, let me tell you something. This is how I know music changes your perspective. Because as a parent, I would chaperone my kids' junior high dances. And there is nothing epic about a junior high dance. And your junior high dance was not any better, trust me. The guys are on one side, the girls on the other. I don't know why we think it was epic other than there was music. There were songs that we could associate. And you know what happened? We started to develop relationship with songs. That's what makes all of this possible. Write this down. When you have a relationship with a song, it can change your perspective on an event in your life. It can change your perspective. It can rewire your brain a little bit. It provides emotion in a world, and because it's personal now, and we can select and we can choose, we can put the music we want behind our life, and it tugs at those emotions even more. And some of us, we know that. We know we still have songs that go back 20, 30, 40 years or more. That if I was to ask you what's your favorite song, you would recall something that is attached to a memory, a moment in your life, right? So we expect music to do that. Listen, today we're going to jump into something. And for the very reason that music seems to appeal to mass amounts of people, right? That the world loves music, and it creates these emotions and these feelings and these expectations in us. The church has the same thing going for it. Most people, if you're here this morning and you're at least open to the idea of who God is, or if you're searching and you're not really sure who He is, you come to God with some kind of expectation that hopefully He can change your perspective. You come with kind of this idea that you're going to get some good emotions out of it, or you're going to have some memories, or it's going to be energizing to your life, or He's going to answer your questions, or He's going to do something that's epic in your life, right? He's going to change your perspective in some way. You are looking for that emotional relationship that way, and that's common in the church. We use a phrase when we talk about this in the church, and at least in evangelical churches, we use a phrase, and it's called having a relationship, a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And we've used this phrase because it really does describe this thing we're looking for. But the problem is we've fallen pretty woefully short of really understanding what it is. And we talk now, a lot of us inside the church, about having a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, but there are questions that don't seem to get answered, and there's hurt and there's pain, there's things that happen in the church, and all of a sudden we're left, we feel like a little bit hanging on the edge and struggling, and the hurts and the pain of that have caused this deep disillusionment for most of us. And maybe that's not you, but maybe you've been there, or maybe you're there and you're trying to figure out how to get out of it, or maybe your neighbors are there. I don't know where you're at. But it's like you're looking for the right soundtrack in your church life, right? We're going to explore this over the next few weeks. This is what I want to dig into. And the reason I want to dig into this is we started this conversation. Debbie Swindoll was up here when I was on vacation last summer, and she kind of gave us a real introductory conversation about this life with God. And I want to expand it more because at Journey, we talk all the time about what it means to discover life with God. That's really the first thing we want you to understand here at Journey. And that it's not going to be wrapped up in events, and it's not going to be wrapped up in a ritual or you making some big sacrifice. There's something else that happens when you have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. But do you know what it is? And if you don't, how do we get there? Or are we just going to be left to live a frustrated life, a disillusioned life when it comes to our faith? And if that's where you're living, if that's where you're walking, I would say stay with me for the next few weeks. Don't give up just yet. Let's talk about it. But I'm glad you're here. Because more than ever, when I look out at the world and the landscape and the horizon, I just see people who are desperate to know more about Jesus Christ, and they're not getting the answers they need. So we're going to dig in a little bit. To do that, I want to go back to the beginning. If you've been around here long enough, you know this is where I always like to go. So we're going to go to Genesis 1 again. Genesis 1:1. If you don't have a Bible, look on the screen, or you can turn there and take some notes in your flyer. In Genesis 1:1, what we have is Moses beginning to write about the creation of the world in those events. Moses is going to convey what was going on, and here's how he starts in verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That phrase, in the beginning, is a rich phrase. You have to remember this. When Moses wrote this down, and most people would hear it, they would hear it, and they didn't get to go home and look at the words, right? And even when Jesus was still walking the earth, not everybody had their own copy of the scriptures because, one, the Bible didn't exist as it exists now. And so we would have to listen to these words. So much of the scriptures were written that way, with the idea that you were going to hear them first before you ever got to sit and read them and take them apart. And the thing about the way Moses wrote this, when he says in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, what he's saying in such a way would have caused the hearer to recognize a couple of things right away. The first is this, that there was God and he was watching over the world. That before anything came into being, while the world was still impotent, just kind of static, nothing was happening. In fact, if you go into verse 2, you're going to see the earth is described as formless and void, okay? Nothing was going on. Not only that, it did not have the capacity to do anything, to act upon itself. So in the beginning, there is this God, and he stands ready to bring fertileness to the world. He stands ready to create, to bring something new into the world, into the universe. He stands ready to act, and he has the power to act. And he's got a purpose behind his actions. The second thing they would have noticed when he said, in the beginning, is the ancient hearer would have heard this. Oh, there's going to be an end. See, so many times we hear in the beginning and we think, okay, well, let's talk about the beginning of the story. But the ancient hearer would have heard, well, if there's a beginning, there has to be an end. So we're about to hear how this thing is going to work. And what you get is not just a God who is going to create, he's going to act, but he's got purpose, but he's got purpose that he's going to be able to summarize, that he's going to direct us to, that he's going to point us to as we grow and as we populate the earth. So God is in control, has purpose, and he has purpose for us. And we encounter in just that short little verse that regardless of how you think today, and listen, we're not going to argue some things, regardless of how you think life came to be, like regardless of what you think about if it was the Big Bang or whatever, regardless of how you think, here's what you know in Genesis 1, that there is a who behind the whole thing. I'm not going to argue with you scientifically. I just don't think it's necessary right now. My bigger concern is that you understand the who, not the band. Some of you will catch up to that. I want you to understand the who behind all of creation. Because the who is this person, this personal being who has purpose and gives purpose. And he created and sustains this whole thing from beginning to end. And you can look at all the accolades of mankind and man, there are some great things that have happened. I was very thankful for the MRI machine on Christmas Day when I'm in the hospital and they're looking at my lower back. Man, I was very grateful for the MRI. I was also very grateful for some drugs, but that's a whole other story. I was very grateful for the advances in medicine that day, right? My doctor, or my physical therapist, we were talking about that this week, that just 100 years ago, somebody who had my condition of bulging discs in the lower back would be pretty much left to do whatever they could do. And I think to myself, what a miserable experience. So mankind has done some amazing things. Mankind has created some things, but we created out of what we've been given to create with. Have you ever looked at a keyboard? Put the keyboard on the screen. The thing you need to know, if you're not a musician, is this. Every musician knows there are only 7 notes in all of music. Those 7 white keys are the only notes in all of music. The black keys are the flats and the sharps, but they're just variations of that note. The keys on either side of the keyboard are octaves. There are 7 notes. 7 notes that Brahms used, 7 notes that Beethoven used, 7 notes that Aerosmith uses. Now, I heard some of you know Aerosmith. 7 notes that in 2011, the last time they kind of did a little survey, said there are roughly 97 million songs in the world. And those 7 notes make up those 97 million songs. So we're creative. We took those 7 notes and we've spun them all different ways. But see, God created out of his personal nature. He created with a purpose and for a purpose. And God created you with purpose. God created you with purpose. Now, the soundtrack of your life, the music you like to carry around, right? The thing you like when you listen to music, and some of you are not sophisticated enough, that's why you don't listen to George Strait still, but whatever that soundtrack is in your life, we all different. We're all different. But it creates emotions, and it creates moments, and it creates things that we enjoy, right? And we're different that way. But when God created, when he put his soundtrack in play in the universe, he created with one singular purpose. He created all of us with one singular purpose. And that purpose drives all of us, whether we know it or not. So by the time Moses begins to describe more of creation, we get down to the 6th day in verse 26 of Genesis 1. Watch this. He says, "Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness." And we're learning more about that purpose. That God himself is more relational than perhaps we had even thought of. That he's going to be known eventually as the God, the Trinitarian God, and that word's going to come about later, and the Bible's going to unpack it more, but we get a glimpse of it already in the creation story of chapter 1 in Genesis. That God exists in communion with himself. That he's always been in community from eternity past to eternity future. And so when he created us, and he created with purpose, and he created for a purpose, that purpose is simply this. Your purpose is to walk with God. Your purpose is to walk with God, to be in community, to have the same type of experience that he experienced. Your purpose is to walk with God. And when he put us in Eden, here's the thing, the garden was designed this way, that mankind would be in relationship with God, and that we would be in that relationship creating together. It would be a collaborative relationship, working together towards a common goal. And we've lost that common goal. And it's showing up right now, and I dare say this, but it's showing up in our social media circles. And it's showing up in our politics. We've lost the common goal. We've lost the purpose of walking with God. And so many times, what we want to do is we want to try to figure out what that purpose is, and we get really sidetracked with this thing of, let's take you back to high school when you were thinking about going to college. We get really sidetracked with this idea of, well, what's my purpose, God? Should I be a surgeon one day? Should I be a construction worker? Should I become an engineer? Should I go into sales? And we get really sidetracked with this idea that like if we miss that one little common purpose, that our whole life's going to be a wreck. But see, I don't think that's what God meant. When he created you for a purpose, with a purpose, I think you can do anything you want to do. I say that, but let's be fair. Some of us can't be surgeons, and some of us shouldn't be surgeons, but some of us shouldn't be musicians. So I get there are limitations because of your giftings, but seriously, it's not the issue is not the job, the title that you have. The issue is, who are you walking with? That he created you with a purpose, for a purpose, to walk with him. And when you get to the end of the story, remember I said Genesis starts with there's an end? When you get to Revelation, so many times today, the way we get to the book of Revelation, if you've ever been around the church much, or even if you haven't, you know that there's this book that has these really odd imageries in it. And not only that, they're kind of strange, and we want to know what they are. And so we're trying to figure out what the beast is, and we're trying to figure out the dragon and the bowls, and we're trying to figure out all this stuff. And the thing about Revelation is, I think it's a lot more simple. That in chapter 21, when John begins to describe the very end, and he writes this in verse 2, he says, I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the dwelling place of God is where? With man. Good. He will dwell where? With them. And they will be his people, and God himself will be where? With them as their God. There is one purpose and one end and one movement. And listen, you can be a door-to-door salesman, which really they don't exist anymore. You could sit on a phone all day and make cold calls. You can be a banker, a lawyer. You can do anything. And all have one purpose. That we walk with God. And that God has this relationship with us, this community. The community that he shared with the Godhead from eternity past, and he wants to share with us. Why? Because that's what it means to have a personal relationship with Jesus. That's why we use that phrase. It is very personal. But it's messy. It's messy. And we get into this relationship piece, and things start to happen, and things start to fall apart. And before long, what happens? We push away from our faith. We push away from God, and we just say it's not working. The same thing happened in the garden. You know that. The same thing happened when the serpent came on the scene, and Adam and Eve were admiring fruit on a tree that they weren't supposed to eat from. And the serpent basically says, look, eat from this tree because God told you not to eat from it, but he just did that because he doesn't want you to be like him. Understand, God is offered to walk with them, and Satan says, well, yeah, but he just doesn't really want you to be like him. And so what did they do? They ate to be like God. They decided it wasn't enough to walk with God, but they wanted to be like God. So instead of living with God, they ate the fruit to be like God. And folks, that's what sin is. That's what sin is. I get that we have turned sin into a list of things, and it's really been damaging to the church. Not because those things on the list aren't sin. Those things often point out the manifestation of our sin. But sin for us is what? It's telling God, I want my own soundtrack. I don't want yours. I'm going to listen to my own music this time, and I don't like your music. It's taken not the Walkman today, but the little MP3 players and the earbuds that I got for Christmas, and it's putting them in, and it's walking around, and it's doing it your way, living life on your own. So instead of walking with God, we've taken a relationship with Jesus, and we've just kind of turned it into a t-shirt. And now if I'm a Christian, it's just another name that I call myself by. It doesn't have a purpose behind it. If you're a Christ follower, you have a purpose. The purpose is to walk with God. It's something we all have in common. It's why we can all sit together, and even though our musical tastes differ, and you have not come over to my side yet, even though our playlists are different, all of that doesn't matter. The thing that matters is that we all have the same purpose, to walk with God. And so we submit our hearts to him. That's what it means. So the question is today just a Sunday service, or are we gathering to celebrate and walk with God together? Right? Are you just listening to a podcast during the week because it fills a little space? Or are you growing and thinking in your relationship with God and seeking to hear from him? Do you read the Bible because it's time to read the Bible through the year one more time, just to check it off your list? Or as you read the Bible, does God speak to you? Do you listen for him? How about this? Do you speak to him about it and walk with him? What does it look like? What does your version of Christianity look like? Because I do think people are trying to redefine this thing. And I'm telling you, there is one purpose that unites us all. And we're going to keep pushing into this for the next few weeks. We're going to do some fun stuff. We're going to have some actually joint conversations up here. But here's what I'd love to invite you to do this week. Would you consider for just a few minutes this week? Would you take a few minutes every day? Would you maybe, if you're bent this way, take a piece of paper and journal a little bit and just sit before God and talk to Him about your heart? Ask Him to talk to you about your heart. You're saying, I don't even know what I believe about God. That's okay. I believe He'll listen. If you're willing to sit, if you're willing to engage Him, He'll engage you. So would you consider this week sitting for a few minutes, talking to God about your faith? Where have you been hurt? Where are you disillusioned? Where are you sure you're not even connecting with it? You're not even sure that you're a genuine Christian anymore. Where is it that you feel like you've been sold a bill of goods by the church? Are you willing to talk to Him about it? Are you willing to sit with Him? Are you willing to investigate the purpose He has for you of walking with Him? Let me pray for you.